All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to argue on behalf of CrossFit. I know it's pretty crazy, but typical with this channel, I like CrossFit. I think it has its place in general fitness. I think it has its place, in specific fitness at certain times. But we are going to argue on behalf of it because the argument against its use is not properly being discussed. And even if it was properly being discussed, I think most CrossFit coaches, most CrossFitters themselves would agree with not using it in specific cases, like this person mentioned. So we're going to get right into it. This guy, his name's John Welborn. He used to work for CrossFit, and I think it was called, like his branch was called CrossFit Football. And now he's kind of like taking up arms against CrossFit. And he says it in a bunch of podcasts. So we're going to pull up a clip here and kind of go over what he has to say against CrossFit's use specifically for athletics. And again, I disagree with his disagreement, and we'll get into that more. But first, if you like this t-shirt, if you like this hat right here, it's black on black giraffe hat, go to barbellapparel.com/Telander. That's where you can get all this kick-ass swag. You can use it in the gym. You can use it casually wherever you want. There's my stuff. There's my custom Telander stuff, but there's also my favorite things that Barbell Apparel makes on there. Again, that's barbellapparel.com/Telander. Check it out. It'll be linked in the description. Okay, so here's the clip.
What Greg asked me, do you think CrossFit is an athletic form of training? I said, no, it's nothing but sagittal plane bilateral hip hinging. So you hinge in a sagittal plane. That's it. Everything looks like hinging and going forward. Kipping pull up. Every move was a bilateral hip hinge.
I got a term I use, sagittal plane warrior. It's like,
yeah,
ooh.
Everything can get done in a hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is, look at where Greg failed the margin of experience. He was a gymnast.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yep.
Right. He was good on the rings, all straight ahead. There's
and
rotations.
Not a ton of ground-based activity either.
Yeah. The best trick, Glassmember pulled was convincing the world that work capacity and athleticism were the same. If you're trying to run a gym model, it's a lot easier just to have somebody do nothing but bilateral hip hinging and smoke them to fucking death and then show them, we did this workout 3 minutes. Now you did it in 2. You're a fitter version.
Okay, so really quickly, the specific things like bilateral, there's a ton of lunging, so that's unilateral. Yes, I would say most of the movements are in the sagittal plane, but I would argue that that's not an issue, especially in strength and conditioning. Also, the idea that class models are easier when they're done in the sagittal plane. Yeah, sure, that might be true, but you can always sit and do a Russian twist, which again is a transverse plane. I mean, you could do things in the frontal plane, you do side crunches, there's so many different gymnastics movements that go all 3 planes of movement. I think what we see a lot of in strength conditioning is this is a great opportunity to use some sort of terminology talking about planes of movement to then feed into weaponized specificity, which if we look at the actual point that this guy is bringing up, it is exactly that. Weaponized specificity is a term that I've coined that functional coaches, these guys who use functional fitness and functional training as a weapon against typical strength and conditioning training, your squats, your deadlifts, your pull-ups, your bench press, your overhead press, any sort of typical strength building movements, they're going to fight against so that they can sell their programming, and they're always going to use weaponized specificity. So what does that mean? Okay. And there's art. He's fighting for his life in the comment section. This is John Welborn and he's basically saying, the sport of football is done on all planes of movement, and it comes at you really fast, and you have to be able to move this way and that way. You can't just train it by doing sagittal plane movements. Again, bilateral hip hinging, he loves saying, even though there's plenty of unilateral hip hinging in CrossFit, but that's not the argument that I'm making. And this is why this is important. Because, if you were to just take a football team and go train CrossFit and then put them in a game, that wouldn't work. And that is the vacuum that John Welborn doesn't know that he's created here, right? It's and this is the vacuum that every strength and conditioning coach creates when they just go, movement that do in gym is not movement on field. Therefore, movement in gym is bad. Like, they don't understand that periodization and phases of training is very important. And actually, load management, okay, load management is huge as it pertains to fatigue management is also huge. So you may have periods of time where you're pushing a football team, pushing their strength numbers, pushing their hypertrophy, pushing their power numbers with all of these sagittal plane movements that everyone loves to demonize for no reason. You could push those really hard in hopes of driving adaptation. Why? Because you don't that adaptation cup, right? You have an empty cup and you fill it with adaptation needs. You could fill it with all those strength training needs in the off season. And then as you get closer to the season, your preparation, you need to have these athletes be more mindful of specific training, all of which occurs at practice. Again, in other words, they create the vacuum that everything you do at every moment in time must lead to football. Sure, it does. But there is breadth of time. There's load management, like I'd said. There's frequency. There's all these different factors that you factor into an entire macro cycle. I'll give you an example. I worked alongside Northwestern University football team. And what they would do before going into the weight room is they would do a lot of plyometrics, a lot of transverse plane stuff. They're cutting, they're doing all this crazy stuff, and it's outside of even practice. So, and this was done through strength and conditioning. So they're doing all of that. And then guess what they're doing? They're going to the weight room and they're doing the bilateral hip hinges that everyone hates. And they're all progressed through a program that is directed towards getting the athlete prepared for the season, which I think John Wellborn would agree with. But the argument he's making is against exercise selection. And you got to understand, guys, the exercise selection argument against CrossFit is not as strong as you think it is. Okay. The argument that I think people should be making against CrossFit as its use specifically for football is that the fatigue management is not specific enough for football. So doing a really intense Metcon with hang power clean, like basically DT, okay, deadlifts, hang power cleans, shoulder press, jerk, shoulders to overhead. You do 5 rounds, and I think it's 6, 9, and 12. Okay, doing that for a football player actually isn't as ideal as just doing sets of deadlifts, sets of hang power cleans, and sets of push press, and developing strength in a much more specific way as it pertains to a 20-year-old male athlete at its peak physical performance. It is not the argument, it is the loading, frequency, and all the stuff that I keep mentioning here. Why is this so important? Because I've done a ton of CrossFit. I also have an athletic background as an athlete, and then also as somebody who coaches strength and conditioning. So I understand all of these pieces. And, one workout, I went into a CrossFit class, and this is common. We did 5x5 back squat. Then it was 5x6 RDL. And then it was maybe some sort of press or something like that. Maybe we stayed with the lower body, but there wasn't any quote unquote CrossFit Metcon. We did a strength and conditioning day, and it would have worked perfectly with a football team. Would have worked great. And if you're going to make the argument that, okay, CrossFit is not good, then you have to understand that you have to be very specific in what aspect it is. And when you make that specific argument, the one against saying, hey, maybe a 20-year-old football player shouldn't do a Metcon before going out on a field to practice, I'm pretty sure the CrossFitters and the CrossFit coaches would agree with you. Right? That wasn't exactly what it was developed for. And at the end, and this is Andrew Hiller made a video about this exact thing. Andrew Hiller would agree. He would say, he'd be like, yeah, maybe the typical CrossFit class doesn't work specifically for a Division I football team en masse. You'd probably have to develop a little bit more of a specialized program, not with specific movements that are on the transverse plane and the frontal plane, making sure that you get all this planar stuff. No, it would just be more specific to your demographic. Okay? Okay, I want to move on to another clip here that just really takes the wind out of my sails. I'm just going to play it.
This is another reason I don't love bilateral lifting. I love this picture. Megan on the left, Sydney on the right. Both of them, 4'11", 5'11", exactly 1 foot difference in height. Seated, exactly the same height, meaning their spinal lengths are identical. Okay, that Sydney on the left is your basketball player, your left tackle in football. She's a lot of your really highly skilled athletes. They possess way more femur and way more tibia. If you get a chance, Taylor's here somewhere today, look at Taylor sitting in a chair, and you'll look and think, that doesn't look right. It doesn't look right, because he's got a lot of legs, right? But the point being, this is another reason. Megan, like people who like, I always say, people who like squatting, you know what they look like? Squatty. Right? The people who tell you, oh, you should squat, they're like, yeah, I can squat.
So how do we solve it?
I've never had a problem squatting. I always did it really, really easily. But when I had my basketball guys, they didn't do it all that easily. And people say, oh, you can teach them. I'm like, you could. Or you could just do it on one leg, right? I mean, that's the difference.
There we go. That's his solution. Just do everything unilaterally. And that solves, they hate the word bilateral. They hate it. And I think, again, this is so much of what this channel has been talking about, or what I've been talking about for so long. It is the way people hate the back squat, because they just simply don't understand the breakdown of it. Okay, so the athlete with super long femurs needs to do unilateral movements because they have super long femurs and super long fib tips. I believe that it is very worthwhile for an athlete to stand on 2 feet and be able to crouch down into a squat. What that says to me is that they have robust control over the mobility in their hips, knees, and ankles, period. When you can do that, you know what? I'm just going to show you guys, because this is getting, you guys see me over? Okay, here. I'm wearing really short Barbell Apparel shorts here. I have really long femurs and I have really long fib tips. Okay, get my capo and my sunglasses out of the way here. Now, this ability for me to squat down is actually really important to me. And I don't think it's a big ask for anyone, any Division I athlete, to be able to do this. Okay, and if they can't do it, I think what you should do is learn how to develop it. And it really doesn't take much time at all. In fact, you can do something like this, develop this sort of thing in a warm-up. I have many, many videos teaching people exactly that. And I did this with my athletes when I was coaching the Texas A&M rugby team, when I was working with athletes at Northwestern University and Texas A&M University. We would hold on to uprights and we would sit down like this, and then we'd figure out, okay, we can understand the low squat from this position, this free hanging low squat. Okay, now if we hold an implement like a kettlebell, again, these shorts are way too short, dude, it's crazy. Like a kettlebell or a dumbbell, we can hold it and we can go down into that position and we can come up, okay? So look, the idea here, again, is that he's demonizing a movement that some athletes just struggle with more than others. And he goes, okay, well, not all athletes struggle with single leg movements, so let's just do that. And in some way, they've convinced themselves that, oh, because it's a natural way and it helps so much more with athletic development and ability, that, oh, the back squat and all bilateral movements are crap. All bilateral movements are crap. All movements that are just in the sagittal plane, all methodologies that are they just make these rules. And they don't understand, they don't want to have any sort of nuance in this. And okay, Zach, why are you going so crazy about this? Because the same arguments are made about the power clean. I believe that the hang power clean is incredibly valuable as an athletic and power developer. I've done this with many athletes. The hang power clean, I believe, is a very solid movement. It's very, very safe, and you can do it very quickly. However, people don't break it down into simple ways, and they see it as some really difficult thing that a Division I athlete could never be able to perform. It's dangerous. It takes too much time to develop. All these things, which are completely untrue. This is like the rhetoric that is continuously, and it has never slowed down. Since I've been in this field, this has never slowed down once, man. It just continues on and on and on. So look, Hiller, all the CrossFitters, I'm on your side with this one, right? And even if I brought up a reason why you shouldn't prescribe classic CrossFit to a specific athlete, I'm pretty sure Hiller and the rest of the CrossFitters would agree with me. However, the argument that John Wellborn makes and the argument that, what's his name, Mike Boyle, oh, I know Mike Boyle, makes is it's wrong. It just continuously proliferates and it's wrong. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.